do think that top-down has a lot of advantages, and particularly us on the security side. And a security person really should be able to go look at an OpenAPI spec and early in the process identify potential problems. Right. And so by encouraging a top-down approach, not only do the developers have the ability to make sure that their design is good from a functionality, from a business standpoint, all of those, but also from the security standpoint. You can validate that there's no there's no huge roadblocks that'll keep you from moving forward.
Welcome to the season 3 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Nathan Byrd, a Principal AppSec Architect at Applied Systems. Nathan's journey is truly unique. Before joining Applied Systems, he spent an impressive 24 years at Mastercard, where he rose from a software engineer to a Principal AppSec Architect. That's the longest tenure I've seen from anyone on the podcast. Nathan is passionate about building things, whether it's his early days as an internet fan, building projects with Raspberry Pi Pico, or more recently, creating OAShield. This open source project helps generate WAF config files based on OpenAPI specs, which we dive into during our today's conversation as well. We explore whether traditional WAFs are becoming obsolete in the age of OpenAPI specs, how to keep them accurate, and why adopting a top-down approach to API specs is a key to enhancing security. Nathan also provides valuable advice for aspiring developers passionate about security and explains how he believes AI will play a transformative role in shaping the future of AppSec. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready for Nathan's opinions. Dive right in. So, hi Nathan, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today with me. So thank you a lot for joining. It's a pleasure. And as you mentioned, it's never, too late to come and share your experience, especially now I've started to working, on a new exciting project. So definitely, the right time to do that. And you were kind of also the first person who I've seen who worked the longest at the company. Wow. A lot, especially now, a lot of people change jobs. I think every 2-3 years. I think maximum what I've seen was 10 or 7, so 24 is definitely a huge amount of time. And I saw how you progressed there, from a software developer you started. Even though when you started, I think, as a software developer, right, you worked on some security-related projects already at the beginning. I think Log4Shell remediation, like security champions, and then you transitioned into the application security architect role. So how did this transition happen organically, or how did you decide, okay, now I want to do only security?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I don't think that I really did transition.
Okay.
Let me explain. Because really I started from a young age. I started off as someone in my high school job was doing PostScript converters in QuickBooks. That was a number of years ago, but at the same time, I was going to the 2600 meetings. I was interested in security from a long time back, and so I've always kind of had that dual nature. When I started in software development, for example, one of the first things that I did when I started as a web developer, you had mentioned. Is I found a hard-coded login within the application. You put in a name and you have admin access. Now this was 24 years ago, so I don't think I'm giving away anything.
I'm sure now maybe some developers do that as well.
Right. Well, hopefully not. And that was one of the first things I did. And what I'm getting at really is that I've always been interested in security. Whenever the project came up where there was a security focus, whether it was PCI certification, whether it was some of those challenges you mentioned, whenever it was, I would try to be involved with it because it was always a passion of mine, right? So what happened was, and this was about the time of Log4Shell that I'm sure everybody on here remembers, but I was working on that. I was helping with the group that I was working at the time, helping with the Log4Shell. And I had a lot of friends in the security group, and I asked them, well, why do we not have a tool specifically for helping with this? Why is it that we have to do kind of some of this manual work to look and find out where our vulnerability, the Log4Shell specifically, where it's at. And they said, well, great question. We're starting a project to implement an SCA tool, so why don't you join the team and help with that?
Okay.
So that's how I ended up moving over to the security side. But I have to say, I don't know that they're two different, that they're necessarily exclusive. I think that I know a lot of software developers that do performance, that do testing, that do database, and I know a lot of professionals in those areas that focus on the development, or on the side. So security people focusing on development, or database people who also work closely with the development teams, and that's what I consider myself, just straddling the fence, so to speak, and really wanting to just make things better by combining the two. Your peanut butter and jelly, so to speak.
How did it feel, to participate in building the SCA tool from scratch? Because now, especially because of OpenGrep just, came out, there's a lot of controversy about this topic in general. How did it feel?
It was fantastic. Now we used a different vendor, but a lot of it, what I noticed out of it, and this is really, and this could go for OpenGrep or for a lot of them, but what I noticed is that the tool was fantastic that we used, but didn't integrate very well. So what I mean is that like it gave you a command line interface and the ability to run scans and a UI to be able to log in and see the results, that sort of thing. But what it didn't really do is integrate very well into the existing CI/CD processes, into our existing analytics, into all of those things directly. But what they did have is an API. So what I did as kind of that person who straddles both lines is to use the tool but create in this case it was Jenkins pipelines, but Jenkins shared libraries to integrate the tool with our existing process. And that's really where I think that a lot of the benefit comes in is when you can take and enhance your existing ones. Again, work very closely between the two.
I think it takes time sometimes to build this integration as well, and it's not always easy. And now I think there's a lot of discussion, like how if you integrate this tool, how do you manage integrate open source, how you manage dependencies and everything. And I've also saw you actually developed yourself, I think, a Spring Boot microservice, to replace legacy applications, legacy components. And it was very interesting, when I saw that in your description, because recently, I participated in a security research where we found some of the Spring Boot actuators, actually, endpoints exposed, online, and we could go into /admin, for example, /actuator.
Hopefully not now.
Yeah, hopefully that's fixed now, because I think Wiz also talked about actually Spring Boot actuator problems. So I hope it brings more awareness around it. So especially when you replace those legacy solutions by new technology. So when someone builds this new application like you did, how do you educate yourself, or how would you recommend to educate yourself to actually learn about security risks that it might bring? Because it's a bit easier when it's legacy and you can find a lot of information, but if it's new technology, how do you actually confront the security side of it?
Well, first of all, just to mention, there was a great example about actuator. I have worked with something very similar in the past, and actuator is very useful because you can do things like your status checks with actuator, but because of that, it's not using authentication generally. Big potential problem there, right? And so that's a perfect example of the kind of thing that you can get into, and you have to really work to make sure that these things, you're not introducing security issues with your new stuff. And so to your question, when you're doing a new technology, I think that the best is actually just to look at the basics, right? So no matter what the new technology, whether they have, the good news, typically new technologies have helped improve some of the security posture just themselves by putting in helpful things. Like many years ago, it would be that your whatever SQL tool you're using didn't have anything for escaping the characters, and you'd have to do it yourself. And now, of course, it's almost hard to do it the other way. And so there is a lot of progress, and that actually makes things better. But I think when you're not familiar with a tool, you can have those issues with not knowing where the challenges, where the dragons are. But I think going back to the basics, like, input validation, for example, is core to everything. Understanding your OWASP Top 10, going through and really just taking a very basic approach to saying, how is this handled at each step through the process. By doing that, hopefully the new tools, the new all the new microservice frameworks and everything else, hopefully those will help you along the way, but you still validate those same things.
Yeah. I think sometimes we do not master basics, especially like right now. It's actually being introduced, I think, in universities, for software engineers.
That's fantastic. I've been hearing people talk about that, which is it's a long time coming, but fantastic, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I see also developers at my company that it's a bit particular because all of them are passionate about security, but some of them are still students, like interns, for example, and you see that it's definitely very different from what I've seen, let's say, 6 years ago at the companies where I worked. So it's very interesting, progress and more use different tools, but sometimes like we have the whole issue of tool sprawl, and I saw you actually started recently to build your own tool or project in a sense that focuses on it's a generator for creating WAF rule configuration based on the OpenAPI specifications, right? For mod security, I think now mod security is actually taking over by OWASP, but it was before a project of another company. I don't remember which one, but I just saw that now it's OWASP project. Well, it hopefully brings more contributions. What actually pushed you? I think is it one of your first projects like this?
It is one of my an early security, or at least open source. I've done a lot of open source development just through my career on various things, but as far as security related, yes. So I did before that make a little dependency checker SCA tool, but it's not work on one.
GitHub for that.
But it's not prime time. Don't. But in any case, I have worked on a few other things, but it's one of the first projects. And what I started with on it was kind of what I was saying earlier about the relationship between development and security. This really came out of some discussions with people about how we can start using some of the development, some of the things that are there from the development side already, and start using that in our security practice, right? Instead of, it seems a lot of times, at least in my experience, that we're kind of reinventing the wheel, right? Like we're saying what interfaces are there, where are they, or trying to implement our own testing on the security side when some of those things have been solved already at the development sides. By working together, you can kind of get to get more, you get a better overall experience, and so that's what OAShield was, an idea that that the OpenAPI specs. A lot of teams have good OpenAPI specs. A lot of times they use those. If they use those for creating their services, then you can take those specifications that already exist, and they already have generators. So the OpenAPI project has an OpenAPI generator tool, and it can generate things like your Java code or your your Go code or whatever. But it can also create I'm not sure you're aware, but Apache configuration. So it's just a second step off of there to say, well, we can also create a WAF configuration out of the same thing, right? And by doing so, we're using the same tools that we are already in use on the development side, and what we're doing is we're creating a positive security model instead of just looking for suspicious traffic. What you're doing is saying only these things are allowed, only the particular methods, only the particular REST endpoints. Those are the only things that are left in, even down to the level of parameters, making sure that parameters can't have any values that are not available in the specification. So by doing that, the benefit is that you are actually giving you're limiting the attack surface in the first place, so that you can only concentrate. You're not looking for. Well, back to your example. Actually, you talked Spring Boot actuator before, and that would not be in an OpenAPI spec, right? So it just wouldn't be allowed, and this tool tool would help alleviate that because those endpoints would not be available because they aren't in the spec.
You mentioned that the idea came from developers, like also your collaboration with them, and you as a former, developer in a sense. Do you think that developers always update OpenAPI specification?
Yes, when it's done right.
Okay, what does it mean when it's done right?
Well, so there's really two different ways. You can either do top-down or bottom-up development on APIs, right? You're either creating the specification first, or you're taking and creating the code and generating the specification off of that, right? So in those two cases, if it's bottom up, if they're just coding and then creating the spec, well, hopefully the tool that is generating the spec is creating a valid spec. And that's testable and something that, as long as that is true, then you have, or there's other means to create that specification. And if you have one of those, then great. And then on the top down, well, I have seen two different ways. Either people created OpenAPI spec as part of the requirements or design, and then they ignore it for the rest of the project, or they use it to generate their code. And if they're using it to generate their code, then it will be up to date. Because the code won't work unless the specification was updated. And that's really the place that I'm targeting there. Okay. As long as they're doing that, then you can put it in the same CD pipeline, same DevOps pipelines. When they deploy their code, they have the specification and it creates the equivalent WAF firewall rules to match the version that they just created for their development. So that's how it stays the same. Now, I can't really help with the first case where they just create one and throw it over the wall, but maybe that is a reason to look at that, to say, hey, can we start generating our code with it, or doing bottom up to validate it, or whatever the case may be.
How would you recommend to actually switch this mindset from bottom up to top down?
Well, I do think that top down has a lot of advantages, and particularly us on the security side, its advantages, because I think that people, maybe we have too much separation, too many walls, and a security person really should be able to go look at an OpenAPI spec and early in the process identify potential problems. Right? And so by encouraging a top-down approach, not only do the developers have the ability to make sure that their design is good from a functionality, from a business standpoint, all of those, but also from the security standpoint. You can validate that there's no there's no huge roadblocks that'll keep you from moving forward. So I think there's a number of reasons why moving to top down is a good approach, and probably something that many teams should be looking at.
I think we need to do a general, let's say, popularization of this topic. Education, I would say, more that's probably the right word, so people can switch the mindset, because sometimes culturally it can be also very hard, but everyone wants to ship code faster, release applications faster, so they want to do it fast in CI/CD and secure at the same time. Then probably they have to switch. And right now, for example, I know that from my experience at Escape that, for example, for us, we automatically generate API schema from abstract syntax tree, so to actually remove that roadblock of potentially outdated, API specs by developers, even like in staging and pre-deployment. So what do you think? What's your opinion about this approach? Do you think it will eventually replace OpenAPI specs? But maybe more and more tools are going to have the ability to do that?
Replace, no. For the same reasons I was talking about some of the benefits of early, not just from a security, having in the requirements and design phase. I think that there's benefits to that. However, I think a tool like that is fantastic for two reasons. First of all, to catch those ones that are not doing things the right way. You could even use it to take the top-down spec and if you diff them and look at the difference and see what matches. Yeah. Validation is certainly one area to be able to do that. Plus, in some cases, the information just might not be there anymore, right? If you're looking at something, you're saying ASC, so if you're looking at something that's already farther down the pipeline and you want to get it at that point, but you don't have it, sure, the right thing to do is to change the culture and get it earlier on, but that's just not reasonable, especially legacy tools. There's a lot of reasons. It kind of goes to a larger thing with not just that example, but in general, I think, like for instance with OAShield, I would not suggest that anybody replace their WAF with this. It's not a replacement for a WAF. What it is it's the ability to do positive input validation, to make it limit the attack surface. But I still think either the OAuth CRS or whatever you're using for your traditional WAF rules is still applicable. You still want to look for all those traditional types of attacks. Same thing here. Anytime it's a kind of a trust but verify model, right?
Security.
Yeah, you want to create you want to create your path to doing things the right way and make things as good as possible, and have the person check, the thing that's checking after the fact as well.
Yeah, I think everything. But that's why we have sometimes the problem of like too many tools because we want to check everything and too many alerts that we can't fix, which is sometimes also the problem as well, especially for developers, what to do with all of that. And you mentioned it's not a
and there, I think too many tools, that is a particular problem in the industry right now. It very much is. I've seen it myself. I know other people have seen it a lot more than I have. I think that where we're going to get to is more in the being able to consolidate the results between these tools, right? I don't think the problem is necessarily too many tools besides steady pricing and, stuff like that.
Depends on the company.
Right. But it's not necessarily the tools. It's the fact that when you're giving the results, if you have duplicate results between tools, that's just increasing everybody's workload. It's if you're having too many false positives and it's from many tools, then you're again increasing the workload on everybody, right? And so I think that what you're going to see is a lot of cases where, well, in some cases maybe there are places where people are starting to really consolidate the tools. But besides that, there's also the ability here to I think the other way we need to do is look at how we can combine them, how we can combine the results and make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. I think that's another area that I think we'll hopefully see some advancements.
Yeah, I think for sure that's where like the consolidations and ASPM tools that appear, the reason why they appear.
Yep. Is the reason for those, right? And it might be that whatever the solution ends up being, because I think we're very much in transition on that still, but whatever the solution ends up being, I think that there will be a consolidation either from vendors or from our ability to include the results from all of them. Actually, another thing that I hadn't mentioned previously, but a project that I have not started, and I don't know if I ever will, maybe somebody that's listening to this will come do it first. I would love that. But another idea similar to OAShield would be to take and use the ability for us to do functional testing. So when you're doing development and you have usually unit testing, and then you have your intermediate testing like functional testing that runs across the application, right? And I think we have a real opportunity there to combine that with our DAST testing, for example. So our DAST is doing the same thing as functional testing, but a security person is making it, and it's functionally duplicating work. Right. Yeah. Also, your DAST tests, how do you know what the code coverage you've got on the DAST test? I mean, typically that's a bit of a hard problem too. In many cases, they have been addressing on the development side. So again, working together, I've seen a couple projects out there already where they take the functional testing tool and be able to use it to use a proxy for OAuth. OS Zap, be able to use that to do the fuzzing at the same time. So that's another example of where combining these things, and maybe somebody will kind of package that all together into a project. If nobody else does, maybe I will eventually.
Yeah. I think actually I've seen one of the startups starting to do functional testing because I've actually had a discussion about it. I will check the name and maybe I'll send it to you back later because I can definitely it does ring a bell, so I will check that and we'll get back.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Yeah. And if I could say it, so that's where you asked before about the open source and doing the OAShield, and that's actually one of the things that I do like. On open source is I do think that we can push the vendors a little bit by, coming up with some of these things as open source so that the vendors have a base or kind of a baseline of functionality. Yeah. Here's the expectation, because you could always use the open source tool and then build on top of it. So it's fantastic that a vendor is doing that. I think we also should hopefully have some open source to do the same thing to encourage everybody to do it, right?
Quite often it's an entry point either for, let's say, developers to implement a part of it, or for a very limited amount of application. Like you can use that for, not at scale, like usually the tools that you can use or pay for them because it's something that you can use at the scale with a lot of application. That's why everything is geared to enterprise. But you can see that the smaller companies, at least when it's open source, they can use it for one or two of their apps, and they don't need an extensive set of functionalities. And for you, what is the future for you, for OAShield, that because right now you focused, I think, only on mod security WAF. So because are you planning to expand it if you don't start working on the functional testing?
Yes, I am. I'm absolutely planning on expanding, and that's the idea. This was as much of an example of the fact that you can use the generator to create a language than it was about the specific mod security language, right? Mod security is fantastic, and hopefully it's getting a bunch of new life with Karaza and the ability to, you can implement it as a sidecar, that sort of thing. So hopefully it's going to get some new life. But even if not, you could use it, for example, to create a set of JSON rules or F5 rules or a number of other systems. Anything that you can write a configuration for, you could create. And so what I'm planning on doing, the first one was mod security, mostly because there is the great open source tooling around it. Started with that, and then the idea is to expand from there, add in the additional backends from that.
Are you planning to add any AI agents? Because that's a hot topic right now.
I am not with OAShield, although I very much am open to contributors, oashield.com. Please jump in and do that, right? Agents, AI and security has been absolutely massive, right? And we're going to see a lot of things changing. I do think OAShield is a very specific thing where we're reducing attack surface. And so I don't see as much the direct use, but somebody else will, right? And absolutely, that same process of taking the OpenAPI spec and converting it into something, it could absolutely be used for something like that as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think maybe we will see some development there, because at least I've seen really a lot of articles being published on that topic. I think one was by Anshuman. I don't know if you've seen it, how he replicated the technology with AI agents by analyzing the JavaScript files, like basically analyzing what we did at Escape as a research exposed front ends, decompiling JavaScript files, and then analyzing whether there are not any API secrets or any secrets actually in them by simply writing a prompt. So that's something that's, at least I find very interesting. And for you, where do where do you think kind of the future of API security is going? Because for example, the project, the OAShield, it focuses, on a subset of API security problems that exist. Just there are so many. What do you think, where do you think we're going, and what do you think is actually very necessary for the industry?
Yeah, I do think, like you said, of course, AI is going to be huge. Anybody who's not talking about it will be talking about it soon, and it is going to be huge. Gen AI, as well as some of the other AI technologies that I think people are starting to circle back with now. But in any case, yes, that's going to be absolutely huge. Now, that solves a particular problem, like the one you were mentioning. I'm not familiar with that one specifically, but that sounds interesting, and that is an example of something where you could use an AI agent to look for a specific thing, for example, secrets in source code, and be able to ask it to do it. Now, would you trust that to have found every secret? Probably not. Probably what you want to do is you want to combine, again, kind of what I was saying with OAShield. I think it's going to be a matter of a multi-layer, and that's what we're really going to, hopefully, I'm hoping we are moving towards, is more of a multi-layer approach. Instead of just relying on a single technology, whether it is what it is or whether it's a more traditional solution. I think that the real power is in the combination of them. I think that having that to go find all the things that you can't write just a regular regex pattern for example, for your secrets, that kind of thing will be very powerful as a catch-all in the future for sure.
Yeah, I think what what you mean is that we also need a kind of combination of reactive and proactive measures.
Exactly. Yep.
So actually helping on one side developers build those secure API and then creating rules to actually, let's say, to protect them once they're built as well. I think the hardest part is probably the developer side of things. From your experience, I guess you know as a software engineer yourself that it is hard to, if someone doesn't want to have security mindset, to change that. That is probably the hard part. Just because it's harder to change people than to change processes. But it's I think what you mentioned that you would not trust it to find everything. What would you trust? What type of tool or what type of technology would actually you trust, or would say, okay, this ticks all the boxes for me, so I can trust it completely to implement.
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit there. The as far as developers and not all of them being interested in security, I do think that I have not found that. I found that it's very easy to get developers interested in security. I find that it's harder maybe to convince in some cases management or other stakeholders, product owners, that sort of thing, about the needs of some of the time investment in security.
Okay.
But the developers themselves, if you sit down and there's not many people that you don't sit down with and you go, hey, here's how easy it is to hack a website. You sit them in front of a cyber range and give them some tools and some, and the ability to go in and kind of learn some of the stuff. Some of it is actually just cool and fun. I haven't found it super hard to get somebody interested in it. Willing to spend the time is more the concern, and that is just based off of what their end of year reviews are looking like, what their objectives are, what they and I think that's the important thing, is getting security into the objectives overall, making sure that time is available to do the good security, rewarding the people who are the security champions, making sure that they're recognized. All of those things can help improve the security mindset, but I don't think it's for lack of interest, from what I've seen at least. As far as the what you said, as far as the future and going in and the use of proactive, reactive security and all of that, I think that what we'll see is AI being used on the development side as well. For example, one of the challenges is with tools keeping your dependencies up to date, right? And one of the hardest parts about that is if you're doing a major upgrade, like an upgrade of Spring or Spring Boot, and you're going from one version to a next major version, there's a number of non-backwards compatible changes that often go into that. Right? And when you look at those, sometimes that's very hard and time consuming to do, which means development teams often, in some cases, if they can get away with it, put off doing those upgrades for completely valid reasons. I was I was a primarily development for many, many, many years, and I know exactly how that is and why people do that, because again, it's what they're judged on at the end of the year. But if you have tools, specifically one of the things I'm really excited about is some of the AI tooling now to help do package upgrades and security remediation. Particularly like on the package upgrades, now there's some challenges with it currently. I think it's still getting matured, but overall, I think that's going to be a fantastic way to convince development teams and other stakeholders that keeping their packages up to date is not something that is hard to do, or is something that was super time consuming, which has really been the challenge, right? And then on the other side, once they have done those upgrades, the other challenge is on testing it, because if you don't have a good intermediate testing, if you don't have confidence that you can deploy something, then even if you can develop it quickly, why would I do this upgrade to library XYZ if I don't have an immediate need to, if it might cause things to break in production? But that's where AI is really helping there as well, with the ability to do things like create your intermediate tests with AI, with AI agents that go in and actually record the tests for you, saving a lot of time. And hopefully what we see is greater overall coverage of testing, which is, by the way, I think a security concern. test coverage in development is a security concern.
Yeah, coverage is always a security concern because, for example, for APIs, you want to make sure that all routes are actually tested, and then that's the percentage that you are actually demanding or asking for from the tool, and you can usually see all the logs of that can show you how much endpoints were actually covered in the test. I just thought about the funny question actually for you, because you mentioned all the libraries, all the dependencies, AI being tested. For your open source project, are you 100% sure that all the libraries are up to date? And did you test
As of this morning, it is. I use you try to use your own tools, and so I do have a dependency checker. I'm using, it's hosted on GitHub, so I'm using all the native GitHub security features to try to keep it up to date. But that's actually it's a fantastic point and a fantastic challenge, right? The question isn't whether it's up to date now, because I'm going to keep it up to date now. The question is if it's going to be up to date 3 years from now. And I do think that's something that as that the source community probably does need to look at, how not only when it's in the immediate interest or the growth phase of an application, but when it's in maintenance, there is some responsibility and is some need to make sure that these things stay. And I think the vendors could help with that even more than they are now too, as well, of course.
For sure, because sometimes when I go check different projects on GitHub, I saw they were updated 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I mean, your project is new, but sometimes you don't know if the libraries that they used actually didn't introduce any new vulnerabilities that were released since then. And there's always a question asked towards the end of the podcast. If there would be one piece of advice that you could give, let's say in your case, to developers who are passionate about security, young security passionate developers, to learn something or to do, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. Probably my first bit of advice would be make friends with the security department, and for the security department, make friends with the developers. I mean, it's the absolute best thing you can do, because I think that often there's silos. Some companies, at least, there's silos between those areas, and that is something that we should actively work to break down. That is, if I was a young developer, one of the things I benefited from, because I did have, that from a young age security interest, I naturally went and reached out and met some of the security people, and their concerns were my concerns, and it really helped my career. I think the same thing can happen. I think should happen for people going in. They should actively be looking for mentors, not just in their own community, but in security, and not even just in security. I have to say, I think that we should treat security much like we do many other areas of the organization, whether it's our DevOps, our admin, our performance, all of those different areas. They are all factors in how to be a good developer, and the best thing that you can do to be a good developer is to get a broad view of all of them, including security. As long as you think of it as a necessary part of the function, along with all of the other things that you have to do. Here, actually,
it's hard
this is a little bit of my own theory, but the way I think of developers, when people just say developers, I think of them as developer generalists. Just like with security, we have security generalists, and I'm in application security, so I'm more of a specialist. I think a developer is a developer generalist. So you could have a developer security person, bridges the line between app security or your security programs, or you could have a performance, and there are testing developers that are focused on testing. So if you consider them developer generalists and security generalists, then the other people that meet in the middle are more specialized, right?
It is kind of in the middle, and it's very interesting that you call them generalists, because sometimes I think developers get more and more now specialization still, front end, back end, and then back end Ruby or back end Java, and you get sometimes more and more specialized. What would be the one book that you would recommend someone to read?
So I swear I did not set this up, but I have it sitting next to me because I just got it, and I think you probably have it too. The Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. I've been starting this. I just got it the other day, and
tell Tanya, she'll be happy.
I've already posted something about it
Yeah.
to Tanya. Yeah, it's because I absolutely love it. I do actually. I would like to buy copies for the development teams
Okay.
and for the security teams. I gotta say because I know that's a lot of praise, but the reason what I like about it is that it has a lot of both the general advice about good security practices as well as specific advice about individual frameworks and libraries, which surely will get out of date over time. But at the same time, having those specifics and being able to bridge between the two, it's a fantastic resource. I would suggest everybody pick it up.
Perfect. That's definitely, I'll put the link under the episode. I'm sure I've read the first one. It's actually one of the first books that I've read. Software application security, but the secure coding I haven't bought yet. But yeah, I'm sure it is a fantastic book for sure. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge and experiences with the audience. It was a pleasure having you on board.
Thanks, Alexandra. It was a real pleasure.